My name is Dennis Mitchell, 34 years old, and I built a tech company from nothing after my family wrote me off as a failure. For 7 years, I avoided their judgment, their comparisons, their dismissal of my dreams. Then came Dad's 70th birthday party, my chance for reconciliation, I thought. I never expected to be literally seated away from everyone else, or that my emergency business meeting would create the most vindicating moment of my life. Before I tell you how my helicopter landing changed everything, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I finally stopped seeking validation from people who never believed in me. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant living under the weight of excellence. My father, William, established himself as one of Boston's premier neurosurgeons, saving countless lives with steady hands and brilliant diagnostic skills. People literally thanked him in the streets for saving their loved ones. The Mitchell name opened doors throughout New England's medical community. My mother, Catherine, wielded her own impressive influence as a federal judge. Her reputation for fair but firm rulings made her both respected and feared in legal circles. Dinner conversations often featured discussions of landmark cases or complex legal theories that flew over my young head. Between my parents' twin towers of achievement stood my older siblings, the golden children who followed the prescribed path to success. Edward, 3 years my senior, graduated top of his class from Harvard Law and secured a partnership at Griffin and Walsh by 30. His corporate law expertise made him the go-to attorney for Boston's business elite. He married the daughter of the city's former mayor and lived in a Beacon Hill brownstone that appeared in architectural magazines. My sister Amanda completed medical school with honors, following Dad's footsteps but carving her own niche in pediatric oncology. She saved children from cancer while raising 2 perfect kids with her surgeon husband. Their family Christmas cards looked like advertisements for perfect living. Then there was me, the Mitchell family anomaly. I excelled in computer science at MIT, but dropped out during junior year when I recognized an opportunity in emergency response software that couldn't wait. My parents never forgave what they called throwing away your future on a computer game. They didn't understand that I saw a critical gap in how emergency services communicated during disasters, a gap that cost lives. Dennis just needs to feel special, Edward would explain at family gatherings. He'll come around to a real career eventually. The early years proved them right in some ways. While my siblings bought homes and started families, I lived in a cramped apartment with 3 monitors and endless ramen noodles. My startup ResponseSync survived on small local contracts and investor meetings that usually ended with interesting concept, but too risky. Every family dinner became an exercise in endurance. Dad would spotlight Edward's latest big case or Amanda's research publication. When conversation reluctantly turned to me, he'd ask, "Still playing with your computer thing?" before quickly changing subjects. Mother's approach was more subtle but equally dismissive. "There's still time to finish your degree," she'd say, sliding law school brochures my way. "Judge Hoffman's clerk position opens next fall." I still remember Christmas 5 years ago when Edward received a Rolex from our parents while I got a gift card and interview tips book. The message couldn't have been clearer. Get a real job or remain the family disappointment. But things had finally changed. Last month, ResponseSync's coordination software successfully managed resources during the Midwest flooding crisis, cutting response time by 40% and earning national attention. Emergency management agencies suddenly returned my calls. Investors who had dismissed me now wanted meetings. Most significantly, the Department of Homeland Security expressed interest in implementing our system nationwide, a $50 million contract that would validate everything I'd sacrificed for. The final negotiation was scheduled for tomorrow, but they needed answers on implementation questions today. Dad's 70th birthday party couldn't have come at a more pivotal moment in my career. After years of distance, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to finally bridge the gap. With the pending government contract, I could finally show them that my unconventional path had merit. I spent 3 weeks searching for the perfect gift, eventually finding a rare first edition medical text Dad had mentioned wanting years ago. I practiced what I'd say when they inevitably asked about my little project. I would calmly explain our software's life-saving capabilities without sounding defensive or boastful. This time would be different. Standing in my apartment, adjusting my tie, I made a private promise. This would be my final attempt at gaining their approval. At 34, I needed to either repair these relationships or accept their limitations and move forward without the weight of unmet expectations. The drive to my parents' Brookline mansion brought back a flood of memories. The sprawling colonial with its perfect landscaping and circular driveway hadn't changed. Luxury cars lined the approach: Jaguars, Mercedes, and BMWs belonging to Boston's elite who'd come to celebrate my father. Taking a deep breath, I parked my modest but newly purchased Tesla among the lineup of luxury vehicles. The dashboard clock read 6:30, exactly on time. With gift in hand and hope in heart, I walked toward the imposing front door, unaware of how the evening would transform everything. The massive oak door swung open before I could ring the bell. Mother stood in the entryway, elegant in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes registered recognition without warmth. "Dennis, you made it," she said, offering a cheek for the obligatory kiss. "You're exactly on time." The way she said it made punctuality sound like a character flaw. Before I could respond, she turned to greet the couple arriving behind me with genuine enthusiasm. "Margaret, Thomas, come in, come in. William will be thrilled you're here." I stepped into the foyer, immediately noting the transformations. The already impressive space had been enhanced for the occasion with elaborate floral arrangements and professional lighting. A string quartet played in the corner, providing a soundtrack for the mingling guests in designer attire. Navigating toward the great room, I spotted Dad holding court near the fireplace. At 70, William Mitchell remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair that added to his distinguished appearance. Surrounding him were several men I recognized as hospital board members, all laughing at something he'd said. "Dad," I said, approaching during a brief pause in conversation. "Happy birthday." He turned, his expression shifting from animation to something more controlled. "Dennis, didn't think you'd make it." He accepted my brief hug with a perfunctory pat on my back. "You remember Dr. Jameson and Dr. Whitman?" The men nodded vaguely in my direction. One asked Mitchell's youngest, right, "What was it you do again?" Before I could answer, Dad interjected, "Dennis is in computers," then smoothly redirected the conversation to a new surgical wing being funded. I felt myself being efficiently marginalized, a familiar family dynamic executed with practiced ease. Excusing myself, I moved toward the bar, where I ordered a scotch and surveyed the room. About 60 guests filled the space, most in animated conversation. I recognized few faces beyond immediate family and their closest associates. "Well, look who decided family was worth his time." Edward's voice came from behind me, practiced and precise like everything about him. My brother stood with two men in nearly identical suits, all holding tumblers of expensive bourbon. "Good to see you too, Edward," I replied, extending my hand. He shook it with the firm grip he'd perfected in business school. "Gentleman, my little brother Dennis. He dropped out of MIT to pursue his fortune in. What are you calling it these days?" "Labs." The men chuckled on cue. One asked, "Any success with that?" "My nephew thinks he's going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg." "We're actually developing emergency response coordination systems," I began, but Edward cut in. "Dennis has always been interested in games. Remember that summer you built that ridiculous computer instead of interning at Johnson and Burke?" Dad was furious. He turned to his companions. The internship would have set him up for life. "The software we've developed has reduced emergency response times by nearly 40% in recent implementations," I continued, maintaining my composure. That's nice, Edward replied with the condescending tone he reserved for children and service staff. Hey, have you met Harrison? He just made partner at Glendower Financial, and with that, I was dismissed as he guided his associates away. Across the room, I spotted Amanda surrounded by admirers as she presumably detailed her latest medical achievement. She caught my eye and waved, excusing herself to approach me. Little brother, she said, air-kissing near my cheek. You clean up almost nicely. Her eyes scanned my suit with the evaluative gaze she typically reserved for patients. Off the rack. Custom, actually, I corrected. The suit represented my first professional splurge after securing our first major contract. She nodded without conviction. So how are you? Still working on that app for emergency phones or whatever. Response Sync is doing well. We're actually in talks with Homeland Security about nationwide implementation. That sounds interesting. Must be nice to have such freedom. Some of us are too busy saving lives to play with computers all day. She laughed as though she'd made a harmless joke. Oh, have you met Uncle Robert? He doesn't remember you from the last family gathering. The next 20 minutes consisted of introductions to relatives and family friends who either didn't remember me or expressed surprise at my attendance. One elderly aunt repeatedly called me David, despite corrections. At precisely 7:30, a server struck a small crystal bell, catching everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. and Judge Mitchell invite you to proceed to the dining room for dinner. The crowd began moving toward the massive dining room, where I could see an elaborate table setting gleaming under the crystal chandelier. I moved with the flow until a server discreetly intercepted me. Mr. Mitchell, she asked quietly, holding out a small cream-colored card. Your seating assignment. I took the card, noting the elegant script that read patio seating Dennis Mitchell. Looking up, I saw most guests receiving verbal directions, not cards. There must be a mistake, I said. The server looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, sir. These are the arrangements I was given. As I stood contemplating the card, Edward passed by with his wife. He glanced at the card in my hand and smirked. The patio is for failures, little brother. Enjoy the mosquitoes. He continued toward the main dining room without breaking stride. Amanda approached next, her expression arranged into rehearsed sympathy. Dennis, don't make a thing of it. There just wasn't enough room at the main table, she whispered, though I could clearly see several empty chairs through the doorway. It's actually quite nice on the patio. Very casual. Like you prefer. I looked toward my parents, now greeting guests at the dining room entrance. Neither acknowledged the situation or met my gaze. The message was unmistakable. I remained outside their circle in every sense. With as much dignity as I could muster, I followed the server through a side door onto the stone patio. A single small table had been set up near the edge, far enough from the main proceedings to ensure isolation, but close enough that I could see everyone else through the windows. The setting sun cast long shadows across the carefully manicured lawn. Can I get you anything, sir? The server asked, her discomfort evident. I'm fine, thank you, I replied, taking my seat at the solitary table. Inside, I watched the lively dinner service begin. Servers moved efficiently between kitchen and dining room, delivering the first course to appreciative murmurs. Through the windows, laughter and conversation created a backdrop of conviviality from which I was deliberately excluded. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Glancing down, I saw a message from Jamie, my business partner. Homeland Security needs answers on implementation timeline tonight. Contract hanging in balance. Call ASAP. I stared at the message, then at the scene unfolding inside without me. As the family disappointment sitting literally outside the celebration, I suddenly saw with perfect clarity how little had changed and how much I had. 15 minutes passed before I decided to attempt rejoining the party during the first round of speeches. Rising from my isolated table, I moved toward the French doors leading back inside. Just as I reached for the handle, a server emerged, nearly colliding with me. "Lo, Mr. Mitchell," she said, startled. "I was just coming to check on you. The first course will be out to you shortly." "I thought I'd come in for the toasts," I explained. Her expression shifted to discomfort. I was specifically instructed that patio guests should remain in their designated areas. For flow purposes, she added the last part quickly, as though providing a reasonable explanation for my exclusion. Through the glass, I could see my father standing at the head of the table, champagne flute raised. His voice carried faintly through the barrier between us. "Catherine and I are blessed with children who understand commitment," he was saying. "Edward has built a legal practice that serves the most prestigious clients in New England, while Amanda continues the Mitchell medical tradition with distinction at Boston Children's Hospital." The deliberate omission stung despite its familiarity. I returned to my solitary table as my father continued praising his acceptable offspring. My mind drifted to my high school science fair victory, creating a primitive algorithm that predicted earthquake aftershocks with surprising accuracy. When I'd excitedly shared the judge's comments with my father, he'd merely asked why I hadn't joined the debate team like Edward. 20 minutes later, a server finally appeared with my first course, a cold soup that had clearly been sitting waiting while everyone inside had progressed to their second course. "Sorry for the delay," she said, placing it before me. I nodded my thanks, not trusting myself to speak without revealing my frustration. As I began to eat, the patio door opened again. Edward emerged with 3 men, all holding whiskey glasses and cigars. "Mind if we use the patio for a proper smoke?" Edward asked without actually seeking permission. "Dad doesn't allow cigars inside since Amanda had kids." The men spread out across the patio, effectively claiming the entire space while ignoring my presence except as an obstacle. Edward positioned himself near my table, speaking loudly enough to ensure I heard. "Dad was smart to keep Dennis's situation discreet tonight. Half the hospital board is here, not to mention Judge Harrington, who's considering me for the district attorney shortlist." One of his companions glanced my way. "What exactly does your brother do again?" "Who knows? Something with computers." "He dropped out of MIT, threw away every advantage our parents provided." Edward took a long draw on his cigar. "Every family has one, right? The cautionary tale." They laughed as I sat immobile, fork suspended above my plate. My phone vibrated again, another message from Jamie. "DHS officials requesting emergency conference. Big opportunity, but needs your input now." I had just placed my napkin beside my plate when Mother appeared at the patio door. She approached my table with the careful neutrality she'd perfected on the bench. "Dennis," she said quietly, "I need to ask you not to make a scene." I looked up, genuinely confused. "I'm sitting here eating cold soup by myself, Mother. How exactly am I making a scene? Your father has important colleagues here. This evening matters to his reputation. And having your son seated outside like an embarrassing secret helps that reputation." She sighed with practiced patience. "You've always insisted on taking your own path. That comes with consequences." Edward and Amanda understood that success requires certain sacrifices and conformities. "So I'm being punished for not becoming a doctor or lawyer." "No one is punishing you. We simply organized the seating based on professional and social connections." She straightened her already perfect posture. "Your father's colleagues wouldn't have anything in common with whatever it is you're doing these days." Before I could respond, the patio door opened again. Amanda entered with her 2 children, 7-year-old Thomas and 5-year-old Sophie, both dressed in miniature versions of adult formal wear. "Mom wanted me to get the kids some fresh air before dessert," Amanda explained. "They've been so well behaved." The children stared at me with undisguised curiosity. Sophie tugged at her mother's dress and whispered loudly, "Why is Uncle Dennis eating outside like Buddy does?" Buddy was their Labrador retriever. Amanda flushed. Sophie, that's not polite. Uncle Dennis is sitting outside because, she faltered. Because Uncle Dennis isn't important enough to sit with the grown-ups, Thomas stated with the confidence of a child repeating something he'd overheard. Thomas, Amanda scolded without conviction. I set down my spoon. It's fine, Amanda. Kids just say what adults imply, right? She had the decency to look uncomfortable. We should get back inside. Dad's about to open gifts. As they left, I recalled the rare first edition medical text I'd spent weeks tracking down. I'd handed it to a server upon arrival, but now realized I hadn't seen it among the displayed presents. Curious, I walked around to the side of the house where deliveries were received. Through a utility room window, I spotted a stack of gifts presumably deemed not elegant enough for public display. My carefully wrapped package sat among them, unopened and unacknowledged. My phone rang, Jamie again. This time I answered. Dennis, I've been trying to reach you for an hour, Jamie said, tension evident in his voice. The DHS committee moved up their timeline. They need answers on implementation protocols tonight, or they're going with Crawford's system instead. Tonight, I'm at my father's birthday party. I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. The full committee is assembling for an emergency session in an hour. This is the $50 million contract we've been working toward for 3 years. If we lose it to Crawford's inferior system, people could literally die because of slower response times. I looked through the windows at my family, celebrating without me. I thought about the unopened gift, the cold soup, the separate seating card, the casual cruelty disguised as logistics. Where's the meeting? I asked. Downtown Boston. The Federal Building. I checked my watch. Getting there through evening traffic would be impossible in time. I'll never make it. That's why I've arranged helicopter transport. It's the only way to get you there in time. The pilot can land anywhere with sufficient clearance. There's a field next to your parents' property, right? I looked out at the expansive lawn beyond the patio. Actually, there's plenty of room right here. Jamie paused. Are you saying we should land a helicopter in the middle of your father's birthday party? For years, I had tiptoed around my family's sensibilities, accepting their judgment, their dismissal, their relegation of me to the periphery of their lives. And what had it gotten me? A cold dinner on the patio while they celebrated inside. Yes, I said with sudden clarity. That's exactly what I'm saying. Text me when the helicopter is 10 minutes out. As I ended the call, something shifted inside me. I was no longer the family disappointment seeking validation. I was Dennis Mitchell, the founder and CEO of ResponseSync, whose work was about to save lives across the country. And for once, my family would have to acknowledge it. Through the dining room windows, I watched servers wheel out an elaborate 3-tiered cake adorned with 70 glowing candles. The gathering inside moved closer to my father, who stood beaming at the head of the table. No one bothered to invite the patio exile to join the moment. The assembled guests broke into an enthusiastic rendition of Happy Birthday while I remained outside, a silent observer to my own family celebration. When the song concluded, my father raised his glass. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, he announced. Especially those who traveled from out of town. It means the world to have our dearest friends and family gathered here. His gaze swept the room, deliberately avoiding the patio windows where I stood watching. The exclusion couldn't have been clearer if he'd stated it explicitly. As the cake was being served, Mother slipped outside again, her expression a practiced blend of politeness and restraint. Dennis, you seem uncomfortable, she observed, as though my discomfort were a personal failing rather than the result of deliberate exclusion. Perhaps it might be better if you left early. Your father has already noticed your restlessness. I've been seated alone outside while everyone else celebrates together, I replied evenly. You've always insisted on being different, she countered. This is simply the natural consequence. Before I could respond, Edward pushed through the patio doors, slightly unsteady from multiple drinks. "Mother, Judge Harrington is asking about your ruling on the Westfield case," he said, then noticed me. "Still here, little brother. I thought you'd have slunk away by now." Mother returned inside while Edward lingered, swirling amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "we all think it's cute how you play businessman with your little computer hobby. We've been tolerating it for years, waiting for you to grow up. ResponseSync is hardly a hobby, Edward. We're about to sign a major government contract." He laughed. "Right. The mysterious government contract that's going to validate your life choices. Very convenient." The patio doors opened again as Father stepped outside, accompanied by several colleagues. He barely acknowledged my presence before addressing his associates. "The view of the garden is quite lovely from here, especially at sunset," he said, gesturing toward the landscaped grounds. One of the men noticed me and asked, "Is this your youngest, William?" "Yes," Father replied without enthusiasm. "Dennis chose a different path. In computers, I understand." Father nodded stiffly. "A phase that's lasted longer than expected. Not everyone can follow traditional success routes," the man offered kindly. "True," Father replied, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Though I sometimes wish all my children had amounted to something." The statement hung in the air between us. It wasn't anything I hadn't heard implied before, but the public nature of the dismissal, spoken in front of colleagues, struck deeper than expected. In that moment, something crystallized within me. For years, I'd been seeking approval from people who fundamentally could not or would not give it. No achievement would ever be enough because the problem wasn't my success. It was that I'd chosen a path they didn't understand or value. As this clarity washed over me, my phone vibrated with a text from Jamie. "Helicopter ETA 10 minutes. Pilot needs confirmation for landing coordinates." I quickly sent our location, feeling a strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd felt like a failure because my family defined success so narrowly. But outside their bubble, I'd built something meaningful: software that would help save lives across the country. 5 minutes later, the first faint sound of helicopter blades whispered in the distance. Initially subtle enough that only I noticed, the rhythmic chopping gradually grew more pronounced. Inside the dining room, a few guests paused mid-conversation, glancing toward the ceiling in confusion. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Conversations faltered as people tried to identify the source of the interruption. I stood, straightening my tie and buttoning my jacket. The helicopter noise was unmistakable now, drawing everyone's attention. Party guests moved toward windows, peering out with curious expressions. Father approached the patio doors, irritation evident in his rigid posture. "What is that racket?" he demanded, stepping outside. Just then, my phone rang. I answered calmly, aware that all eyes had turned toward me. "Mr. Mitchell," the pilot's voice came through clearly. "We have visual on your location. Large property with a suitable landing zone on the south lawn. Requesting final confirmation for emergency landing." "Confirmed," I replied. "You're clear to land." Father's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "Dennis, what is the meaning of this?" Before I could answer, the helicopter appeared over the tree line, its spotlight sweeping across the darkening lawn. Gasps erupted from inside as guests rushed toward windows and doors for a better view. "What have you done?" Father demanded as the aircraft approached. For the first time that evening, perhaps the first time in years, I felt completely calm in his presence. "I've been called to an emergency meeting, Father. Government officials don't reschedule for birthday parties." The helicopter descended toward the expansive lawn, wind from its blades bending the carefully manicured grass. The spotlight illuminated the stunned faces of family and guests who had spilled onto the patio and lawn to witness the unexpected arrival. Edward pushed his way forward. This is ridiculous. You're disrupting Father's birthday with this. This is stunned. Amanda appeared at his side, her perfect composure slipping. Dennis, what are you thinking? The children are frightened. But I could see her children pressed against the windows, faces alight with excitement rather than fear. As the helicopter touched down on the lawn beside the patio, where I'd been exiled all evening, the pilot gave me a thumbs up through the windshield. The side door slid open, revealing Jamie in a formal suit, holding a tablet and looking uncharacteristically serious. My phone rang again. I answered, maintaining eye contact with my father. Dennis Mitchell, I said clearly. Mr. Mitchell, this is Secretary Richardson's office. The Secretary and the Emergency Response Committee are assembled and waiting for your presentation on the ResponseSync implementation timeline. Your arrival status. The name of the Homeland Security Secretary caused a ripple through the gathered crowd. Father's colleagues exchanged meaningful glances. Please inform Secretary Richardson I'll be there in approximately 20 minutes, I replied, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the party. The helicopter has just arrived. As I ended the call, I finally saw what I'd been seeking for years: recognition in my father's eyes. Not approval, not yet, but recognition that perhaps the path I'd chosen wasn't a failure after all. The helicopter blades continued their rhythmic rotation, creating a wind that rippled through the elegant party. Women clutched at dresses and hairstyles, while men held onto loosened ties. The juxtaposition couldn't have been more stark: Boston's elite society, disrupted by the raw power of the machine that represented my world. Several guests had been holding champagne flutes during the cake presentation. As the helicopter settled on the lawn, 2 crystal glasses slipped from shocked fingers, shattering on the patio stone. No one moved to clean up the mess. All eyes remained fixed on me and the waiting aircraft. With deliberate calm, I walked toward the helicopter. Jamie had stepped out and now stood by the open door, tablet in hand, every inch the professional executive. He wore the dark suit we'd purchased together when we secured our first major investor, a visual symbol of how far we'd come from our days coding in a basement apartment. Dennis, Father called, finding his voice. What is the meaning of this intrusion? I turned to face him, standing straight in the helicopter's spotlight. I apologize for the disruption, Father. There's an emergency meeting with the Department of Homeland Security regarding our nationwide emergency response system implementation. Homeland Security, one of Father's colleagues repeated, stepping forward. You work with Homeland Security. ResponseSync has developed coordination software that reduces emergency response times by nearly 40%, I explained, addressing the question while maintaining eye contact with my father. The federal government is implementing it nationwide following our successful deployment during the Midwest flooding crisis. Recognition flickered across several faces in the crowd. My mother stepped forward, her expression transforming with remarkable speed from embarrassment to attempted pride. Dennis has always been so innovative, she said, as though she'd been my greatest champion all along. We've always known his unique approach would find its place. The revision of history was so blatant, I almost laughed. Instead, I simply nodded and continued toward the helicopter. You're just going to leave in the middle of Dad's birthday, Edward demanded, his earlier mockery replaced by poorly disguised jealousy. This is clearly some arranged stunt to make yourself look important. Edward, I replied calmly, the Secretary of Homeland Security and his Emergency Response Committee don't participate in personal stunts. They're waiting to finalize a $50 million contract that will help save lives during natural disasters and other emergencies. My phone rang again. I answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Mitchell, Jamie said, playing his part perfectly despite standing just feet away, Secretary Richardson is asking if we can move up the implementation timeline for the southern coastal regions. Hurricane season projections just worsened. Tell him we'll need to adjust the server capacity, but it's doable, I replied. I'll discuss specifics when I arrive. I ended the call and turned back to the assembled group. Father's colleagues were now looking at me with undisguised interest, whispering among themselves. Edward's wife, Catherine, approached, suddenly warm. "Dennis, we should get together for dinner next week. I'd love to hear more about your company." "You've never expressed interest before," I observed. She faltered momentarily before recovering. "Well, we've always been so busy with Edward's cases and the children's activities." Amanda pushed forward, her professional smile firmly in place. "Dennis, you remember I mentioned my friend in emergency medicine. You two should really connect. Let me introduce you to Jamie." I glanced at my business partner, then back to my sister. "Jamie and I have been partners for 6 years, Amanda. He was at your wedding. You've met him multiple times." Jamie nodded politely but said nothing, allowing me to handle the situation. One of Father's friends, Dr. Nelson, stepped forward with genuine interest. "Mitchell, I read about ResponseSync in the journal last month. The article mentioned your system, coordinated resources, during that apartment complex fire in Chicago. Saved 17 lives by rerouting ambulances around traffic congestion." "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "Real-time traffic integration is one of our key features." "Remarkable work," he said, extending his hand. "William, you didn't mention your son was behind ResponseSync. That's something to be proud of." Father looked momentarily disoriented, caught between his long-standing dismissal of my career and the evident respect it was now commanding among his peers. Jamie checked his watch. "Dennis, we need to go. The committee won't wait." I nodded and turned to the gathering one final time. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening." "Before you go," Dr. Nelson interjected, "my daughter runs emergency management for Massachusetts General. Would you have time next week to discuss your system? We've been looking to upgrade our response protocols." Several other guests suddenly found urgent reasons to request my contact information. People who had ignored me all evening now pressed forward with business cards and questions. Mother materialized at my elbow, her voice low. "Dennis, perhaps you could mention to your government contacts that your father has been pioneering that new surgical technique. The one the medical journal is reviewing." The naked opportunism was so characteristic it almost felt comforting in its familiarity. "I need to go," I said, moving toward the helicopter. Father finally approached, his expression complex. "Dennis," he began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. It might have been the first time I'd seen him at a loss for words. I waited, giving him the opportunity to say something meaningful, perhaps acknowledge his misjudgment or express genuine interest in my work. But old patterns reasserted themselves. "The lawn was just resodded last month," he said finally. "This helicopter is probably damaging it." And there it was, the perfect encapsulation of our relationship. Even in this moment, his concern centered on appearances rather than connection. I nodded once, then turned away, climbing into the waiting helicopter. As Jamie followed and the door slid closed, I caught one last glimpse of my family's faces: shock, confusion, recalculation, and perhaps, from my father, the faintest beginning of respect. The pilot received clearance, and the helicopter lifted smoothly from the ground. Through the window, I watched as the mansion and its occupants grew smaller, the physical distance mirroring the emotional one I'd finally accepted. As we gained altitude, Jamie handed me a tablet displaying the contract details. $50 million for the first phase, with options for another $30 million in expansions next year, he explained. "Everything we've worked for." I nodded, still processing the evening's events. "Was it worth leaving the party?" Jamie asked. Looking down at the shrinking lights of my father's birthday celebration, I smiled. "I wasn't really at the party. I was on the patio." The helicopter banked toward downtown Boston, city lights spreading below us like a circuit board come alive. Inside the aircraft, I shifted into work mode with practiced efficiency, reviewing contract points on Jamie's tablet while he briefed me on the committee's specific concerns. They're particularly interested in rural implementation, Jamie explained over the headset. Secretary Richardson mentioned that response times in less populated areas remain a critical weakness in current systems. I nodded, already considering solutions. We'll need to emphasize the satellite integration and mesh network capabilities. That's our advantage over Crawford's system. As we discussed technical specifications, I felt a curious lightness. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of familial disappointment into a professional situation. The helicopter hadn't just physically removed me from my father's party, it had severed something deeper, something that had been holding me back. From above, Boston looked different, smaller somehow, its patterns more visible. I thought about how perspective changes everything. From my family's narrow viewpoint, I was a disappointment. From 500 feet up, looking at the bigger picture, I was flying to meet with government officials who valued my work enough to summon me on short notice. "You okay?" Jamie asked during a pause in our preparation. "That looked intense back there." "It was illuminating," I replied. I spent years trying to earn a seat at their table when I should have been building my own. Jamie nodded. "For what it's worth, you handled it with more grace than I would have. When your brother called our company a little computer hobby, I nearly broke character. The reminder of Edward's dismissiveness should have stung, but instead it prompted a memory. 3 years ago, when ResponseSync was struggling to secure funding, I'd worked 80-hour weeks refining our algorithms while living on ramen and determination. During that same period, Edward had called to boast about his new summer house, asking if I could take a break from playing with computers to help him move in. I'd declined, working instead on the code that ultimately became our system's core feature. "You know what's strange?" I said to Jamie. "I can trace our biggest breakthroughs to moments when my family was most dismissive. It's like their doubt fueled my determination." The pilot's voice interrupted our conversation. "5 minutes to landing, gentlemen. Federal building helipad in sight." Below us, the government complex came into view, its rooftop landing pad illuminated and waiting. Several figures stood nearby, the committee members who would determine whether our system would be implemented nationwide. "Ready?" Jamie asked. I straightened my tie. "More than readies." The meeting itself was a validation of everything we'd built. Secretary Richardson and his team had specific, informed questions about our implementation strategy, evidence they'd done their homework and were taking ResponseSync seriously. For 2 hours, we discussed technical specifications, security protocols, and rollout timelines. "Your system's performance during the Midwest flooding was impressive," Richardson noted. 30% reduction in response times is unheard of. "Actually, sir," I corrected, "it was 40% when fully implemented." The preliminary data underreported the efficiency gains. He raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Even better. And your rural solution addresses our biggest current gap." As the meeting concluded, handshakes were exchanged all around. "We'll need the final implementation documents by Friday," Richardson's chief of staff explained, "but barring any major issues, we're prepared to move forward with ResponseSync as our primary emergency coordination system." "We'll deliver everything on time," I assured him, feeling the weight of the opportunity, not just for our company, but for the communities who would benefit from faster emergency response. It was nearly midnight when we finally left the federal building. Jamie suggested celebrating, but I declined, suddenly exhausted by the emotional and professional intensity of the evening. "Rain check," I promised. "Tonight I need some quiet to process everything." "The family stuff?" he asked perceptively. "That and the fact that we just secured the contract we've been working toward for 3 years." Jamie nodded, understanding. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we make history." My apartment felt different when I returned, or perhaps I was the one who had changed. I removed my tie and poured a single glass of whiskey, savoring the quiet after the evening's drama. My phone, which I'd silenced during the meeting, showed multiple notifications when I finally checked it. 3 missed calls from Mother, 2 from Amanda, and 1 from Edward. Several text messages waited as well. Edward had written, "Quite the spectacle. Always need to be the center of attention, don't you? Dad's birthday ruined thanks to your showing off." Amanda's message attempted a different approach. "I've always believed in you, Dennis. We should catch up properly soon. Perhaps you could explain your company to me again." I must have misunderstood its significance. The most surprising came from Mother. "Your father and I have always been proud of your entrepreneurial spirit. Several of our friends were quite impressed by your government connections. When might you be available for dinner at the club to discuss your company in more detail?" The revision of history was so blatant it bordered on comical. For years, they had dismissed my work as insignificant. Now that it had been publicly validated by government officials and impressed their social circle, they suddenly claimed supportive interest. The final message came from Father, sent just 30 minutes ago. "The helicopter damaged the new sod. Send your landscaper to assess and repair. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of my professional achievement. Just concern about his lawn." In its way, his consistent pettiness was almost refreshing among the sudden attempts at revisionist history from the rest of the family. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I opened my laptop and began working on the implementation documents for Homeland Security. This contract wasn't just a business achievement. It represented the validation of my decision to forge my own path despite my family's disapproval. As I worked into the early morning hours, I felt a sense of peaceful clarity. The helicopter hadn't just carried me to an important meeting. It had lifted me above the toxic patterns that had defined my family relationships for too long. From that new perspective, I could finally see the situation clearly. I no longer needed their approval. And that realization was more liberating than any helicopter ride could ever be. 1 month after the helicopter incident, I stood in my new office overlooking Boston Harbor. ResponseSync had expanded rapidly following the Homeland Security contract, necessitating larger headquarters and an expanded team. The wall of windows provided a panoramic view of the city, where I'd grown up feeling inadequate in my family's shadow. Now that same skyline served as the backdrop for our company's growing success. On the conference room monitor, a news segment played silently footage of ResponseSync's system coordinating emergency services during a California wildfire evacuation. Our real-time routing algorithms had helped evacuate 3 communities before fire lines shifted unexpectedly, saving countless lives. Seeing our technology make such tangible difference brought a satisfaction deeper than any approval my family could offer. "CNN wants to interview you about the evacuation success," my assistant mentioned, placing a coffee on my desk. "They're calling it a revolution in emergency management." I nodded, making a note to schedule it. Public recognition had never been my motivation, but visibility helped secure contracts that expanded our life-saving capabilities. My phone chimed with an incoming text, "Edward again, the 5th this week." Since the birthday party helicopter departure, my family had launched a coordinated campaign to reinsert themselves into my life, particularly as news of ResponseSync's government contract made local and then national headlines. Edward's approach combined backhanded compliments with networking attempts. "Surprised to see your company mentioned in the journal. Some clients asking about your system. Dinner Thursday at the club. Bring contracts." Amanda took a different tack, attempting to rewrite our past relationship. "Always knew you were working on something special. Remember how I encouraged your computer interests. The children miss their uncle. Lunch soon." Mother's strategy was perhaps the most transparent, suddenly claiming she'd always been my champion. "Your father and I were just telling the Hendersons how we supported your unconventional path all along. They're on the board of Mass General and very interested in your system. We've scheduled dinner with them Saturday. Father's communications remained characteristically direct, focusing on practicalities rather than emotions. Lawn repair insufficient. Send better landscaper. Also, your mother insists you attend Sunday dinner. Confirm attendance. I placed the phone screen down without responding. Their sudden interest emerged only after public validation made my success impossible to ignore. The pattern was transparent, and for the first time, I could see it clearly without emotional entanglement. Dr. Levine, the therapist I'd started seeing following the birthday party incident, had helped me recognize these dynamics during our weekly sessions. Your family's behavior follows classic patterns, she'd explained during yesterday's appointment. They're attempting to reestablish control now that their previous methods of dismissal are no longer effective. How do I respond? I'd asked. That depends on what you want from these relationships going forward. Total estrangement isn't necessary, but healthy boundaries are essential. Her words echoed as I considered my family's latest overtures. The childhood desire for their approval had driven me for decades, influencing decisions and undermining confidence. Breaking that pattern required conscious effort, but the rewards were immediate increased focus, reduced anxiety, and clearer perspective on what actually mattered. Jamie knocked on my open door, interrupting these reflections. The team's heading to Sullivan's after work to celebrate the California success. You joining us? The invitation highlighted another positive change in my life. As I'd released the need for family validation, I'd invested more in authentic relationships with people who valued me for who I actually was, not who they wanted me to be. Wouldn't miss it, I confirmed. Our core team had become something of a chosen family over the years of building Response Sync together, people who shared both the struggle and the triumph, who understood the significance of what we were creating. Unlike my biological family, they had believed in the mission when success was uncertain, not just after public validation. Later that afternoon, I finalized details for a new initiative close to my heart, the Response Sync Innovation Scholarship. Designed to support students pursuing unconventional solutions to emergency management challenges, it would prioritize applicants who demonstrated creative thinking over traditional credentials. Are you sure about the selection criteria? Our education outreach coordinator had asked when I first proposed it. Most scholarships focus on academic achievement. I'm positive, I'd replied. Some of the most valuable innovations come from people who think differently. They deserve support, especially when traditional institutions fail to recognize their potential. The scholarship represented more than corporate philanthropy. It was my response to years of being undervalued for choosing an unconventional path. Perhaps it could help others avoid the self-doubt I'd experienced when diverging from expected routes. As the day wound down, I opened my drafts folder and reviewed the letter I'd been crafting to my father. I'd rewritten it several times, seeking the right balance between honesty and unnecessary harshness. The current version read, Dad, I've been reflecting on our relationship following your birthday celebration. For years, I sought approval you weren't willing to give because my choices didn't align with your definition of success. I now understand this wasn't about my worthiness, but about different values and perspectives. I've built a life and company I'm proud of, one that helps save lives daily. I'm not angry, but I am setting boundaries. I'll consider family gatherings case by case, but I won't attend events where I'm treated as less valuable than Edward or Amanda. I'm not seeking apologies or explanations, just mutual respect going forward. Dennis. After reading it through one final time, I saved it rather than sending immediately. Dr. Levine had suggested giving emotional communications a 24-hour cooling period advice that had already prevented several regrettable exchanges. That evening at Sullivan's pub, surrounded by colleagues celebrating our California success, I experienced a contentment that had nothing to do with familial approval. We shared stories, analyzed what had worked well in the deployment, and brainstormed improvements for future implementations. To saving lives and proving the doubters wrong, Jamie toasted, raising his glass. As glasses clinked around the table, I realized something important. Success wasn't proving doubters wrong, it was making their opinions irrelevant. My family's validation, or lack thereof, no longer defined my worth. I had built something meaningful on my own terms. The next morning, I made two significant decisions. First, I sent the letter to my father, unedited and without second guessing. Second, I approved the final details for the Innovation Scholarship, increasing the funding by 50%. Over the following months, I established a new relationship with my family, one based on adult boundaries rather than childhood patterns. I attended some gatherings but declined others, particularly when the invitation seemed motivated by networking opportunities rather than genuine connection. I responded to messages when they demonstrated respect and politely ignored those that didn't. Some days were easier than others. Old habits of seeking approval occasionally resurfaced, particularly during professional achievements when the childhood desire to hear, "I'm proud of you," from my father would unexpectedly return. But with practice and awareness, these moments became less frequent and less powerful. 6 months after the helicopter incident, Response Sync System helped coordinate the largest hurricane evacuation in Florida history, saving hundreds of lives through efficient resource management and real-time adaptation to changing conditions. As I watched the coverage, I felt a deep satisfaction that transcended any need for external validation. My phone rang, father calling, a rare direct approach. "I saw your company on the news," he said after I answered. His tone was difficult to read. "The hurricane response. They're saying your system made the difference." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I may not understand exactly what your company does," he admitted after a pause. "But it seems to be helping people. That matters." It wasn't an apology or even explicit praise. From anyone else, it might have seemed insufficient. But from my father, this acknowledgement represented a significant shift. "Thank you," I replied simply. After we hung up, I walked to the window of my office, looking out over Boston. The path to this view had been longer and more difficult than it needed to be, partly because I'd spent years seeking validation from people who couldn't or wouldn't give it. The real breakthrough hadn't been professional success, it had been the internal freedom that came from breaking that pattern. Sometimes being seated outside is the best thing that can happen to you. It forces you to see the table clearly, to question whether you actually want a seat there after all. In my case, it led to building a different table altogether, one where value wasn't determined by conformity to others' expectations, but by the meaningful impact of the work itself. Have you ever found yourself seeking approval from people who couldn't see your true value? Share your experience in the comments below. How did you break free from that need for validation? Did being excluded ever lead you to something better? Your stories might help others who are still fighting for a seat at the wrong table. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life lessons, and share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the greatest success comes from having the courage to follow your own path, even when others don't understand it.